leans more to the right. It's complicated. It has to do with an aging, predominantly white population, a higher male population. There are also economic factors at play, a slightly higher unemployment rate. But I think we've seen a rise of the neo-Nazi scene since the 1980s,
okay.
Already before the wall fell.
Right, and where are they getting the money from?
That's also an interesting question. I mean, it would be a lie to say that lots of Nazis have high-flying, well-paid jobs, but there still is a far-right economy. This sort of far-right economy pieces itself together from martial arts fights and training. There are Nazi rock concerts and festivals, which are very lucrative, as well as band merch from all of these far-right Nazi bands. There are even publishing houses, like the Antaeus publishing house from Götz Kubitschek. And funnily enough, in the case of the NSU terror group, it actually came out that the intelligence services were paying informants and giving them lots of money, and these informants were then giving the money on to the terror groups themselves.
Wow. Nicholas, really good to have you on Newsday. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nicholas Porter from the Amadeo Antonio Foundation in Berlin.
Let's go to business news next. Andrew Wood is on the line from Hong Kong. Andrew, some pretty grim economic figures from the United States. The economy there shrinking at an annualized rate of 33% in April, May and June. Tell us more.
Yeah, it sounds pretty bad. The way the Americans present their statistics is actually a bit different to the rest of the world. The rest of the world will say it was down by 9.5% compared to a year earlier. But whichever way you look at it, these are pretty grim statistics. It means that basically any growth that the American economy managed over the past 5 years has been completely wiped out. So it's back to where it was 5 years ago. And the Americans first started compiling GDP statistics in 1947, and these are the worst ever. It's basically about 3 times worse than what happened in 1958, which was previously the record shrinkage of the economy. You can see, I mean, it's basically due to the coronavirus, the shutdowns, the lockdowns, the companies that have closed, the people who aren't going out and eating in restaurants, and so on. Now, of course, it probably would have been far worse had the Americans not stimulated their economy with several $1 trillion worth of money. But they're still, as I say, pretty grim figures. Professor Tara Wilson, she's a professor at George Washington University, and she's pretty gloomy about what the figures tell us.
We did see some glimmer of an initial recovery back in June, but now it really seems like we're stalling out again. Even a robust recovery would take some time given the depth of the losses, but we might not see a very fast recovery at all in our current situation.
So more stimulus then needed?
Yes, the Democrats and the Republicans are trying to agree, I think, another $1 trillion of stimulus. Remember, $1 trillion is one with 12 zeros after it. They've also, American people who are unemployed at the moment have been getting a $600 bonus from the American government. That, though, runs out today, so there'll be pressure on the government to perhaps try to extend that a little bit further.
Andrew Wood, thank you very much. Now, this morning we've been hearing from many places around the world dealing with rising rates of coronavirus infections. Andrew was talking about the United States, and it's here this country which has the highest rates of infections anywhere in the world, with regional spikes in several states across the country. Texas is one of the hardest hit, with hospitals running out of intensive care beds and ventilators. Owais Durrani is a doctor at University Hospital in San Antonio in Texas.
So in Texas at the moment, we are seeing a record number of cases day after day. We can trace this back to essentially Memorial Day and then a second surge coming around 4th of July. A lot of get-togethers happened around those times, and that essentially led to an increase in cases. Unfortunately, now we're starting to see the death rates go up as well.
Just paint us a picture. Tell us what you're dealing with when you're on duty.
Absolutely. So normally when, someone sick comes into the emergency department, our job is to stabilize them and then get them up to the ICUs. For the past few weeks, we get surges of patients that come in. They're very, very sick. We stabilize them to the best of our ability, but the ICUs are full. So they essentially board down in the emergency department for hours upon hours. There's many times where we'll stabilize a patient, I'll get off shift, I'll come back the next day or day after next, and they'll still be there. I'm at a level 1 trauma center in a big city now. Imagine what's happening at smaller centers in kind of more rural communities.
When you talk about rural communities, etc., are social issues, do they play a big part in the spike in cases with regard to poverty and people who are in these rural areas?
They really do. A lot of these health conditions that we see, these comorbidities, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, these have been built into our communities due to a lack of public health education and a lot of other confounding factors that come from social determinants of health.
When you're dealing with these patients, do they speak to you in terms of how they're trying to deal with these situations? Have they expressed how challenging it might be for them?
I think it's many moments that many physicians around the world have experienced, and it's the fact that, a lot of these very, very sick patients don't have family members with them, and they have to make these critical decisions of having to go on a ventilator and agreeing to that, or giving us information about what they want in terms of medical treatment, things like that, and not having family support for that. Those are tough moments every single time they happen.
When you speak to colleagues in the hospital that you work at, hospitals across Texas, what's the general mood, what's the general opinion amongst doctors at the moment?
It's that we're not out of the woods. We're still having new cases in the thousands per day, and that, with our current ICU and hospital bed capacity, is still not sustainable. We simply can't plateau at this level. We need to bring that curve down, and we are still deep, deep in the woods, and we have a long ways to go.
And obviously you're working around the clock is the presumption. I mean, doctors are working hard all over the world. Do you feel sometimes that there's a sense of burning out?
Yeah, we definitely are realizing that we're in this for the long haul, and that at times it does get dark, especially on days when you have a few bad outcomes with patients because of how sick they are. Those days can be especially tough. What I've personally kind of focused on is just one action, one patient at a time, and sometimes if you get caught up into the narrative of how this is politicized, how grim the numbers look, it can get dark. But I think focusing on that patient and that human in front of you kind of helps you not get into that dark place.
That's Dr. Awais Durrani there, speaking to me from University Hospital San Antonio in Texas.
Now, we're going to talk about mercenaries. The former Soviet Republic of Belarus this week said that it had arrested 33 suspected Russian fighters ahead of August 9th election. Russia has denied any knowledge of the men who are reported to work for Wagner Group and may have been on their way to Sudan. So what do we know about them, and what is the African connection? Let's find out from the BBC's Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. To start with, Vitaly, what is Wagner Group?
It's a rather shady Russian company, or a group of companies, which contracts people to fight abroad, and usually the fighting is for the Kremlin's allies, such as separatists in East Ukraine, President Assad in Syria, or General Khalifa Haftar in Libya.
Right, and what has been reported in Belarus about these mercenaries?
Now, Belarus says that they've arrested 33 members of Wagner who were staying at a hotel outside the capital, Minsk. And apparently they had alarmed the hotel's administration because they wore military fatigues and behaved unlike Russian tourists. Now, what does it mean? To quote the official Belarusian news agency, they did not drink alcohol and kept themselves to themselves.
What a description. And does that, is there any credibility in that claim? Does that add credibility to the claim by the Belarusians?
Well, one popular trend of thought that we've seen is that there's actually no reason for Russia to send mercenaries to Belarus, because Moscow's quite happy with President Lukashenko, who's, all but certain to win the upcoming presidential election. And footage emerging from Belarus of the arrests has shown leaflets in Arabic and Sudanese banknotes and a telephone calling card with a picture of a mosque in Sudan. So that could mean that they were possibly on the way to Sudan, where Wagner was reportedly involved before, and where Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Russian oligarch who's believed to run Wagner, reportedly happens to have a gold mining business.
Right, and all this comes against the backdrop of an approaching elections and also protest against the President Alexander Lukashenko. What's the latest on that?
Well, President Lukashenko comes under a lot of pressure economically and politically, and the past few weeks have seen massive opposition protests in Belarus. So some people